raise taxes and I'll say no, and they'll push and I'll say no, and they'll push again and I'll say to them, read my lips.
There is no constitutional basis for a tax on the wages of Americans living and working in the 50 states of the Union. Period. End of argument.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
You caught me unprepared.
I'll come back.
No, I don't want to do that.
There had to be a law, right?
Where is the law? Show me the law.
Why is the Supreme Court decision a silly argument?
And I think we're finished.
They think it's the law, and they have all the guns. You know, it's an authoritarian.
Going back to 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was not the only unconstitutional bill pushed through Congress. They also pushed the federal income tax. It's worthwhile to point out that the American public's ignorance towards the federal income tax is a testament to how dumbed down and oblivious the American population really is. First of all, the federal income tax is completely unconstitutional, as it is a direct, unapportioned tax. All direct taxes have to be apportioned to be legal based on the Constitution. Secondly, the required number of states in order to ratify the amendment to allow the income tax was never met, and this has even been cited in modern court cases. Third, at the present day, roughly 35% of the average worker's income is taken from them via this tax. That means you work 4 months out of the year to fulfill this tax obligation. And guess where that money goes? It goes to pay the interest on the currency being produced by the fraudulent Federal Reserve Bank, a system that does not have to exist at all. The money you make working 4 months out of the year goes almost literally into the pockets of the international bankers who own the private Federal Reserve Bank. And fourth, even with the fraudulent government claim as to the legality of the income tax, there is literally no statute, no law in existence that requires you to pay this tax, period.
I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Woodrow Wilson.
The Federal Reserve Act was passed during the Christmas vacation of 1913, when few congressmen were in town, and those same few congressmen helped pass the income tax amendment shortly thereafter. The Federal Reserve Act was never ratified by the required 3/4 of the states. As a matter of fact, only 2 states ever correctly ratified the act. In 1935, the Supreme Court declared that an organization such as the privately owned Federal Reserve was unconstitutional. And the henchman organization, the IRS, is not really an organization within the United States Department of Treasury. In the case of Chrysler Corp versus Brown, the U.S. Supreme Court admitted that no organic act for the IRS could be found. In fact, no law can be found which requires American citizens to pay taxes on their wages. The IRS, a private collection agency working for foreign banks, specifically the owners of the Federal Reserve, operate out of Puerto Rico under the Federal Alcohol Administration, which was declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of U.S. versus Constantine in '35. Please research the legality of these 2 private enterprises at freedomtofascism.com and supremelaw.org. Who does own the Federal Reserve banks? Numerous private banking companies, such as the Rothschild Bank of London, Warburg Bank of Hamburg, Rothschild Bank of Berlin, and Lazard Brothers of Paris, just to name a few. Does our tax money pay for government services we use every day? No. 100% of individual income tax revenue goes to the Federal Reserve banks to pay interest only on the federal debt. Not 1 nickel is spent on government services. Don't be fooled by empty promises of politicians or the lies of mainstream media. No hero is coming to give us our freedom back from these bankers. Only we can do that. And the freedom of our children depends on you and me and all the freedom-loving people of this great country. I believe in us, and I implore you to research for yourself, and then please take action.
Trying to argue that governmental action is not forceful, Senator Harry Reid
claim that income taxes are voluntary. If the government is in the business of forcefully taking money from some people in order to provide welfare benefits to others, how will the people whose money is being taken feel about the government?
Well, I don't accept your phraseology. I don't think we force people.
Taxation is not forceful?
Well, no.
It's voluntary?
In fact, quite to the contrary. Our system of government is a voluntary tax system.
Oh, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you don't have to?
Oh, of course you have to pay your taxes. But
well, the government will force you to pay, or they'll fine you or imprison you.
We have a voluntary system. The fact of the matter is that if when you pay your taxes, you see in many other countries it's not voluntary. For example, in many countries, the government makes sure that your employer takes out every penny. Many countries don't file income tax returns.
We have withholding here too, don't we?
Pardon me?
Withholding?
With some programs, yes. But I'm talking about in some countries, European countries as an example, you don't file an income tax return. There is no need to because your employer takes all the money out. That's the difference between a voluntary and an involuntary system. You can't cheat and not pay your taxes.
Right.
But I don't accept your phraseology that you forcibly take money from somebody else and give it to that's the way it is on any program.
Can the taxpayer?
Highway program is the same. We take money, we forcibly take money in your phraseology from people and build highways with it. Put people in the army.
Can the taxpayer decide not to pay his taxes if he wants?
He can not pay his taxes if he wants.
What will happen?
He's subject to civil and criminal penalties.
They'll put him in jail. They use force against him. He pays. Everybody pays taxes under threat of jail or fine, under threat of force. In other words, you are forced to pay your taxes, whether you fill out your form voluntarily or whether it's withheld by your employer. You don't have a choice on whether you can pay taxes that are going to be used for welfare programs. You can't make that choice.
Well, but the reason our system is called a voluntary tax system, and I recognize, that ultimately you can't cheat in your taxes, but we have many provisions in the law they don't have in most countries. We have deductibility for home, interest on mortgage payment. They don't have that in most countries. We have deductibility for certain excessive expenses as it relates to health, doctors, hospitals. We have all kinds of tax, some people call them loopholes, but others would call them incentives for people to do business. And that's why you're not forced to pay certain tax. There are ways, if you decide to buy a home.
You can decide not to pay taxes in the United States?
I really don't understand what you're trying to get at. The point of the matter is...
Because you objected to my phraseology. You say that the government isn't forcefully taking money from some people to provide welfare benefits to others. And in fact, that's what it's doing, because all taxation is forceful. It's backed up by physical force. If you don't pay your taxes, the government will intervene with you forcefully. So you don't have a choice. It's not voluntary. You can't decide not to pay and not suffer a consequence. If you don't pay, you'll go to jail. So you're forced to pay.
You don't go to jail. Some people go to jail. There are all kinds of civil penalties. If you don't pay your tax, you pay interest and you pay penalties. The fact of the matter is, our system is a voluntary system.
Lizzie O'Leary has the latest from Washington, where the Obama team and the chairman of the committee that will oversee Geithner's confirmation have thrown their support behind him. Tell us the latest, Lizzie.
Good morning, Betty. Well, the Obama team is calling Geithner's tax problems common mistakes. And if you listen to the public statements here in Washington and watch the public relations push up on Capitol Hill, it's clear that both the president-elect and Senator Max Baucus, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, want Geithner's nomination to go forward.
I believe that these errors, although serious do not rise to the level of disqualification. He's an extremely competent man. The errors were, in my judgment, honest mistakes.
Geithner met with members of the committee yesterday to discuss the more than $48,000 he owed in back taxes and interest, and the most serious being Social Security and Medicare taxes he didn't pay while he was working for the International Monetary Fund. He did pay those as his nomination went forward. He also briefly employed a housekeeper whose immigration papers expired 3 months before she stopped working for Geithner and his wife. Now, a senior Senate aide says Democrats don't view the issue as disqualifying. The committee has known about the tax problem since just after the nomination was announced, and the Obama team came forward to tell them about it in December.
It's not about justice. It's not about agenda. It's not about mobilizing people. It's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.